Okay, this video is how to write better part 2, and it's mostly going to be quotes and a couple of concepts. If you're interested in learning how to write, I would recommend that you make your own computer file or have a journal notebook file you write into, and just keep the parts of this that you like. You can hit the print screen and save a slide, or just keep the quotes you like or the insights you like, and then you'll build it up. I mean, that's what I would do anytime I was learning any subject that was really interesting to me and complex. I would just make this giant computer text file and keep on organizing until I felt I really knew the subject well. Okay, so here's the first quote. The more I read, the more I want to write. And that's from Ben McElvoy. And he has a really good YouTube channel. It's called Hardcore Literature. And he had majored, I think, in English literature at Oxford. So I've enjoyed a lot of his videos. And, if you like something, you got to spend time around it. And the more you read, the more you feel like writing, the more ideas will pop into your mind. It's good to have a notebook always available in the morning as soon as you wake up to write stuff down, because a lot of times you'll have that in that moment between being asleep and waking up. That's a very common time that your subconscious mind has figured something out overnight while you were sleeping, and it just tells you right while you're in that waking up moment, and you want to run and write it down so you don't lose it. Okay, Tom Wolfe quote, "What I write when I force myself is generally as good as what I write when I'm feeling inspired. It's mainly a matter of forcing yourself to write." Okay, so you can maybe force yourself to write in the night if you want, but almost everybody is better in the morning, so take advantage of that. Okay, here's a quote by Stanley Fish, kind of a famous writer, professor guy. He said, "People write or speak sentences to produce an effect, and the success is measured by the degree to which the desired effect is achieved." Yeah, you're either writing to entertain or to inform or to persuade, whatever it might be, and the more skill you have in writing, the more you can write in the way that you want to write. Okay, here's Douglas Adams quote, "If you really want to understand something, the best way is to try to explain it to someone else." Okay, and Aristotle had said long ago the best way to learn something is to teach it. But yeah, this idea of explaining it to someone else is good, like along the lines of a conversation. If you can have an intelligent conversation and keep it all together in a conversation, then you're probably ready to write about that subject or give a presentation on that subject. Okay, Alvin Toffler, he's the guy who wrote Future Shock. "You have to think about the big things while you're doing the small things so that the small things go in the right direction." Yep. And that's a lot like, the idea of align your subconscious goals with your conscious goals, and then everything about you will be focused on them in a good way. You won't have backsliding or reluctance. Okay, Jonathan Franzen's quote here, "Good novels are produced by people who voluntarily isolate themselves and go deep and report from the depths what they find." So yeah, there's truth in that. And I remember Dan Brown, the guy who wrote Da Vinci Code, he had said that, when he's involved in making a movie Da Vinci Code, it was incredibly social, all these people around, all these conversations. And he said it was like the opposite of writing a book where you're by yourself for very prolonged amounts of time, doing what seems like, constant ongoing research. Yeah, so being a writer, in some ways, it's rather lonely. You spend a lot of time by yourself. But on the other hand, it's kind of liberating. You get to be yourself. Whereas a lot of times when you're working at a job, you just have to do whatever you're told, get through the day, versus when you're writing, you're thinking, what do I really want to say here? What is this really about? And that's actually kind of fun. Okay, V.S. Pritchett, "The novel tells us everything. The short story tells us only one thing, and that intensely." Yeah, Edgar Allan Poe wrote a lot about how you write a focused, intense short story by knowing what the ending is going to be before you start it. The novel allows time to ramble. Okay, Julian Barnes, "There is no substitute for the novel that can handle its psychological complexity and inwardness and reflection." Yeah, in the hands of a great author, a novel is a unique, wonderful experience. Okay, here's a lady writer named Annie Dillard, and she writes this quote here, "When I teach, I preach. I thump the Bible. I exhort my students morally. I talk to them about a dedicated life." And I like that. I mean, think about what best professors you had. The best professors you've ever had were probably professors who maybe they were nice to you, maybe they helped you in some way, they gave you a thought, treated you like a person rather than a number in some giant auditorium. But also the best teachers the ones that were the most strongly opinionated. Even if you disagree with them a lot of times, they were very entertaining. And I remember a medical school professor when I was a medical student. The guy's name was Dr. Gustavo Espinosa. Okay, and he was a hot-headed Colombian, really, really, really opinionated, temperamental, but he was the best professor in the entire medical school. Some people would make fun of him, say he was crazy, and he would say things like, when you know you are right, you must fight until the last red blood cell in your body. Okay, and the reason I mentioned the guy was he was so dramatic and over the top, and partly Spanish, the language, is all drama compared to English. English has been largely sort of wimpified, pussified, with all this correctness stuff versus, Latin is still Latin lover, muy macho. And man, was he macho over the top. But that's partly why his class was so fun. He would say things in such a memorable, 100% absolute way that it was very entertaining. I still remember cases that he showed from all those years ago versus the vast majority of medical lectures. They're soporific, okay? So yeah, he would win the Golden Apple winner as the best teacher in the whole med school year after year after year. Okay, so Annie Diller continues. Be careful what you learn, for that is what you will know. The more you read, the more you will write. The better stuff you read, the better stuff you will write. Be careful what you read, for that is what you will write. Yeah, so that's good advice. If you're planning to write on a subject, you want to get the best possible books on that subject. Try to find the people who are most knowledgeable and have a conversation with them about it. That's how you become an expert on the subject. And it takes a lot of effort to dig for the best stuff. A lot of times you have to, kiss a lot of frogs to get to a great one, okay? Reading medical research papers, you'll read, 10, 15 crappy ones, and then you'll come to a great one. It's just how it is. Annie Diller goes on. She says, anything that you do not give freely and abundantly becomes lost to you. And that's also true. What'll happen for a writer is you'll get some idea and you'll just feel it in your gut. This is funny. This is good. This is clever. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, you should go with it. Unfortunately, what happens, you're like, well, the teacher might get offended or somebody might get offended. And it's actually true that you kind of have to push as close as you can get to what you'll be allowed to say or not say, because if you don't push towards that, that's a lot of times where the best material is. And a lot of times that means maybe embarrassing yourself. Sometimes you try a joke and it just doesn't work. Well, sometimes a joke works with one person but not with another one. And what she's saying here, and I agree, is you should go for it most of the time. I mean, you got to use your judgment. Don't say something that's going to get you in trouble and be stupid. But you'll develop a feel for it with time. And that stuff that puts you on the edge, makes you a little nervous, that's usually your best material. Okay, here's just some stuff in the old Strunk and White. I used to call it Stunk and Bite Me, Strunk and White. Okay, when a sentence is made stronger, it usually becomes shorter. Brevity is a byproduct of vigor. Make definite assertions. Avoid tame, colorless, hesitating language. Okay, from Strunk and White, Guide to Style, Elements of Style. So that's pretty classic stuff. And basically, again, if you think about having a conversation with an intelligent friend, that'll tell you what to say, because you'll want to say stuff that's funny and interesting to your friend. And you won't want to rehash boring, lightweight, lame stuff. So it gets you to do things right. And it's also good if you make yourself laugh. If you're laughing at the joke, then it's probably pretty good, and your friend will probably laugh at it too. If it doesn't really make you laugh, then probably no one else is going to laugh at it either. All right, here's Thomas Merton's quote. If you want to help people, you've got to make up your mind to write things that some men will condemn. Yeah, that's the other thing about being a writer is people, the most offensive thing in the world is telling the truth. So you have to be careful. You're not even allowed to tell the truth about many things. So you just have to use your judgment and try to tell as much truth as you can. Okay, Benjamin Dyers wrote a book about Dyer's English. This guy's like an editor, and he said, a good sentence is one that the reader can follow from beginning to end, no matter how long it is, without having to double back in confusion. Yeah, that's a pretty good definition. They should be able to flow with the idea. Now, this sentence, what he did is he broke it up with hyphens, which gave you just enough of a pause that you could confidently lock in the previous phrase and then move on to the next one. And it all flowed logically so that was easy to comprehend the entire long sentence. So you got to do something to put a little pause in there for the reader. It could be a hyphen, it could be a semicolon, something to just, the hyphen tells you that all this stuff is connected and it gives you a little break. A semicolon could have done the job as well. Ellipses, 3 consecutive periods could have done the job as well. You could put colons in there depending on the context. Okay, this is Phil Lapat. He wrote a lot of essays about writing. Here he goes. Most good essays are a conversation with yourself. You must keep the reader engaged with wit, conflict, mischief, and honesty. Yeah, if you think it's funny for your friend, you'll say it. Conflict and tension makes things more interesting. Suspense, like Alfred Hitchcock had said, can be prolonged in quite a long time. Mischief, yeah, their lives are usually boring. They want something fun to read about. And you got to be honest. If the reader feels that you're not being honest, then the book sucks. They can't trust the reader. It's not authentic, and then why waste their time with it? Okay, he continues. Personal confession makes the reader feel less lonely in their confusion and darkness. And confession makes you a more trustworthy narrator. Okay, so yeah, that's good. And what that's basically saying, it's a lot like Ralph Waldo Emerson. That which is most true in our deep, inner self is what the audience will feel most true and resonate with. And you just got to use your judgment. That's correct, but is it something that you're comfortable saying? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Lapat continues, have fun writing because it enhances the reader's experience. Yeah, if you're having fun, the reader's more likely to have fun too. Okay, here's another guy, Dom DeLillo, some brief quotes from him. Dramatic tension cannot be produced when the outcome is preordained, so don't give away the ending too fast. Writing is a deeper level of thinking, an intense form of thought. The writer is the person who stands outside of society, independent of affiliation and independent of influence. Oh, I made my little guy too small here, so I'll make myself a little bigger here. Okay, so a good writer is somebody who's relatively independent in their pattern of thought and insight. And the way you become independent in your thinking is to read a lot on your own and avoid all the standard media outlets, because they're always going to give you some generic BS. But when you read on your own a lot and also talk to old people, I learned a ton of stuff from talking to old people or reading books by old people. They're more likely to tell the truth. Young people usually don't know much, and middle-aged people are usually a bunch of chicken shits because they're all afraid of getting in trouble, especially nowadays. So it's hard to get information from them. Plus, they still don't, a lot of middle-aged people know that much. Where some old guy who's been studying a topic 40, 50 years and he's ready to retire, he wants to share, his lifetime experience. He'll tell you the truth. A lot of these, I learned a lot from these old legacy books. Okay, here's a quote from Antonin Artaud. No one has ever written or painted or sculpted or modeled or built or invented except to get out of hell. And I think there's some truth in that. It's not always that way, but there's some truth in that. The idea of, and Nietzsche had said something similar, that, art is the salvation from the suffering of life. So basically, you have these dreams and visions when you're young of how the perfect middle-aged world should be for you. And then most of that won't come true and you'll be disappointed in a lot of things. And so you'll also have learned a lot from the experience, and you kind of want to share it with the younger generation so they could get some benefit out of it or whatever else you've learned. So you get a feeling of satisfaction from doing that, from sharing with other people and helping them. It makes you happier. And you also accept the fact that, in life there's a lot of things you got to plan. Number one, you got to plan your career. Number two, you got to plan your social life. Who are you going to marry, or are you not going to get married? You also have to figure out some way to make money so you can pay your bills and get some food, okay, and have a shelter, a place to live. And it's hard to do all that stuff right. You do the best you can with each part of it. You'll do well on some, not so well with the others. And you'll sort of then just have to deal with the life you sort of made for yourself. And it's not necessarily going to be what you planned or wanted or expected. You just got to deal with it. Okay, Michael Moorcock, he says, the book trade invented literary prizes to stimulate sales, not to reward merit. Yeah, that's true. Lots of the New York Times bestsellers or whatever, they all suck. You go to you go to the grocery store. Every book in the grocery store is going to stink because they wouldn't. If the book was good and it was strong, they wouldn't be allowed to sell it in a grocery store. Okay, so you just know there's not going to be anything good there. We've really kind of got a wimp down society. Let's see. Okay, here's a quote by Bulwer Lytton, the writer. He wrote, "The pen is mightier than the sword." And that's a little bit funny. It reminds me of Shelley, Percy Bysshe Shelley, the English poet, who said, that poets should rule the world, with the idea being a profession tends to always think that its profession is the best and should be more important, should get more credit, more acclaim. Okay, here's another line from George Orwell. "The atmosphere of orthodoxy is always damaging to prose, and above all, it is completely ruinous to the novel, the most anarchical of all forms of literature." So yeah, basically, if you're too scared to talk about things, then you can't write. So a certain amount of courage or bravery is good for a writer. And I remember Orwell, he went and lived on this island when he was writing in 1984, so he could have more time alone. And that's one of the big things about being a writer is you have to simplify your life so you can free up time, and that's another thing too. Your family members, most likely, they can't help you at all with your book, okay? Like, look at my wife. She can't help me with anything I do intellectually, but she can free me up by taking care of all the nonsense with the house. That was a big trade-off I got with my wife. I loved my old house. I didn't want to leave it. I'm sorry I did. But the fact that I'm in the new house, that's really sort of her house, and I don't like it. It's like a female house. There's almost nowhere to exercise, except the weight room. What's good about it, though, is it's her house. So she has to do all the work. So I don't do anything. I just work on my books, work on my videos, do my job, whatever. But I don't have to do anything with the house. It used to take me 8 hours a week to deal with the old house. So that's a lot of time. And I was on call all the time as, an imaging guided surgeon. So I didn't have time to write. When we moved, all of a sudden I got all this time to write, which I like. Plus I also was transitioning from, when I use that word, I mean from being primarily imaging guided surgeon to being, a neuroradiologist primarily. I still do general radiology and some interventional, but mostly neuroradiology. It's interesting, too, how with time, words are disappearing from the language. Something that was an innocent, basic word in the past, all of a sudden carries with it all this extra meaning that is far from one's intentions of the moment. Okay, continuing with some of these writing quotes. "Details are the life of prose." And what that gets at is somebody who really knows a field, knows a situation. The detail they give is obvious evidence that they know it. They felt it, that they were there. And I would always make little notes to myself. I mean, this isn't even from the book. And these quotes are just sort of a bunch of random writing quotes. I had stacks of them. I'm not really going through Rhyme, Rhetoric, and Logic book that I wrote at this time. I'll go through some of that perhaps later. Okay, so I would make notes to myself when I was writing something. Add more rhymes. Why? Because it's memorable. Because I would read something, hear something like, gosh, is that memorable? So I got to make an effort to add more rhymes in. Add more FAQs, frequently asked questions, like Frank Smith. Frank Smith was a really good writer. He wrote Insult to Your Intelligence, a book about modern schooling. It was an excellent book. Add more rhetorical questions. I had read Dostoevsky, Grand Inquisitor, with all the rhetorical questions. I had read some Martin Luther. And, they created incredible drama and memorable writing with their rhetorical questions. A rhetorical question is almost like an accusation. It's also been said, and there's truth in that as well. I think that was David Mamet who phrased it that way. Okay, T.E. Lawrence. What produces literature? Misery, anger, and indignation produce literature. Contentment, never. And I think that's true as well. Just in a funny way, I know for doctors, a lot of doctors are exhausted, they're tired, they just want to do their job, make their money, stay out of trouble, hopefully help their patients. And that's it. Versus for me, I kind of have a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. I sort of feel like, what is there to do? It only takes, 2/3 of my IQ to do my regular job. And I got all this medical knowledge and energy. I want to do something more. And sort of like there's no way to achieve in medicine, just generate your billing codes. And I'm not that interested in money or going faster and faster. I wanted to do great quality work. So getting into all this teaching study skills and nutrition and pathophysiology, learning all that, it gives me something to do. But that's partly where this comes from. if you're just content, like a lot of docs make their money, go on a vacation, spend time with their family, that's all great. But the fact that I want more is what makes me do all this stuff. And also I recognize, the good stuff in medicine is largely not known. It's literally a giant blind spot in medicine. And also, society's kind of going to HELL in a handbasket. So I'm doing what I can to try to make things better. Okay, books are the legacies that geniuses leave to mankind. That's another thing I like about books, is that they can last thousands of years, okay? Look at the writings of the great Greeks. Look at the writings of Cicero. Look at the Bible. Look at, Boethius, Consolation of Philosophy, etc. Okay, here's a nice quote by Paul Scott. He says, writing is more than an observation. It is a feeling. Sorry about the dogs. So basically, that's like talking to a friend. When you talk to a friend, you have a sense of what they're going to be interested in. You have a sense of what they're going to laugh about. You have a sense about how you better be careful how you phrase something. And so that's also good writing. You have this idea. Your audience in your mind's eye is really someone you could talk to, somebody you could be friends with. There's no point writing for dumb shits because they don't read anyway. So you're really writing for intelligent people that share some interest with you. So that's how you should address them. And that's the kind of material you should cover. And that feeling, learning to trust that feeling, that yields good writing. Okay, Quentin Crisp, kind of echoing George Orwell here, has quotes about reasons for becoming a writer. And he says, there are 3 reasons for becoming a writer. The first is that you need the money. The second, that you have something to say and that you think the world should know. And the third is you can't think of what to do with long winter days. Now, that's true, too. I wish if I could do it all over again, I, live near a college and I could coach wrestling at the college level, but I didn't have that. So you got more time because you're not doing that. I wish plenty of other things too, but you can't do it. So, you got time to write. When I was imaging guided surgeon, I was on call all the time and I was constantly getting called back to the hospital versus now that I'm a neuroradiologist, when I work hard, I work a lot. But when I'm done, I'm free for that time. So I got more time to write. It's kind of how your life goes. I didn't really plan my life. I should have planned it better. It's almost like I had the most wonderful life anyone could imagine up until I was senior in high school. And then after that, it's almost like God said, you're going to just work the rest of your life. You're going to be an intense worker. And it's sort of like, I didn't plan it. It just always seemed to be that way. Okay, a quote from August Wilhelm von Schlegel. All right, he said, literature is the immortality of speech. Yeah, when you put something in a book, like I said, it can last for thousands of years. And here's a nice quote by Francis Bacon. We see then how far the monuments of wit and learning are more durable than the monuments of power or of the hands. For have not the verses of Homer continued 2,500 years or more without the loss of a syllable or a letter, during which time infinite palaces, temples, castles, cities have been decayed and demolished? Yeah, that's a good quote. Think about ancient Greece. They had a great sculptor named Phidias who made sculptures, for example, of Athena, and all that stuff is gone. But the books of Homer and the playwrights, Aeschylus, Euripides, Sophocles, the writings of Plato, the Republic, and Aristotle, they're still with us. Okay, so here's a nice quote from Jane Austen. Oh, it's only a novel. Only some work in which the most thorough knowledge of human nature, the happiest delineation of all its varieties, the liveliest effusions of wit and humor are conveyed to the world in the best chosen language. Okay, there's a clever lady. All right, here's a quote by Vladimir Mayakovsky. The writer's duty is to blare like a brazen-throated horn in the fog of Philistinism. Yeah, I think that's part of it. Like I said, that's one of my goals. What are my 2 goals? To try to be the best doctor in the world and try to save civilization. Because when you look around at how people are behaving, man, we're drifting, we're sleepwalking into slavery. And so a writer, and there's been plenty of other writers who said this too, it's part of a writer's job is to try to help people, see that life could be better than this for all of us. Okay, here's Arnold Bennett. His quote, the essential characteristic of the really great novelist is a Christ-like, all-embracing compassion. So yeah, a great novelist can really see things through the eyes of the different characters. And, Dostoevsky, Victor Hugo, Charles Dickens were magnificent at that. There's other novelists who, like Anna Karenina by Tolstoy. He could describe everything accurately, and you would see it and you would feel like you were there. It was magnificent. But Tolstoy was screwed because his heart was not in the right place. Tolstoy, the more you study Tolstoy, the less you'll like him. He was kind of a jerk. So even though he had incredible ability to perceive and describe a situation, in the end, his metaphysics were screwed up. And so that's why I think that Tolstoy was a nice place to visit, but Dostoevsky is far, far better writer. Okay, here's a quote by Evelyn Waugh. Anyone could write a novel given 6 weeks, a pen and paper, and no telephone or wife. So he's joking, of course, but there's truth in that. I knew when I really wanted to write, I would socially isolate myself. And by that I mean I would avoid any social media, any email. I wouldn't talk to anybody unless I had to. And I could double or triple what I was capable of doing in terms of writing. So you really have to choose to be kind of isolated. And it wasn't like I had a whole lot of options. It wasn't like a bunch of people were calling me up and inviting me everywhere. So I was happy to take the time to just write. Okay, other things that help you be really productive is, kind of isolate yourself, avoid beat music. It just bounces the thoughts out of your brain. And then read and listen to all the things that you want to focus on. So if you're interested in writing about Ireland, listen to books about Ireland. If you're interested in writing about nutrition, listen to audiobooks in your car about nutrition. When you're in the bathroom, read about that subject. And you just keep accumulating knowledge in that area and expertise. Okay, Jonathan Franzen, he wrote an essay on how to be alone. And he said that just as the camera drove a stake through the heart of portraiture, television killed the novel. I think what happened is basically it led the public to stop reading, because it used to be there wasn't much of an option for entertainment, so lots and lots of people would read. But nowadays, very few people read. I have some doctor buddies who I talk to, and I can tell you, out of like all the doctors and people I know, it's 1 in 100 who I have intelligent, routine conversations with. And that's just because most people don't value reading. And especially male doctors, middle-aged and older, who I will have a lot of detailed conversations. With a woman, you can't talk to a woman the way you can talk to a man. With a woman, there's always a secondary thing going on. You can have an intelligent medical conversation where you discuss a medical topic and she'll know a lot, and it's a good conversation. It's mutually beneficial. But on the other hand, you can't just keep talking and talking to a woman. She's got to get home on time, take care of her kids, or she might think you're flirting with her. It's weird, but it's true, because I know that. With a guy, we'll bounce. When I'm talking to one of my guy friends, we'll bounce from topic to topic to topic, and we'll go back and forth from chemistry to physics to biochemistry to anatomy to neuroanatomy to disease to pathophysiology. Whereas if I talk to a woman, I like talking to women. I have some real smart women. I have women who are really good experts in areas where I don't have that much expertise. So I'll ask their opinion, and I value their opinion highly. But it'll be a conversation, that topic, see ya, goodbye. Versus like when I talk to one of my buddies, it'll be like, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? What do you think of this? Oh, that reminds me. Have you heard the paper on this? Have you heard the paper on this? It's just different, and I would expect that that's probably how women are with themselves. They'll talk the ear off of their other lady friends, but they don't talk that much to a man. There's like different things between men and women talking to each other. We're not the same. There's like the modern world tries to pretend men and women are the same, but they're not. You can't talk to a woman the same way you talk to a guy. You can say anything you want to a guy, and you don't even think twice about it. But with a woman, you have to be careful. Will that be conceived as flirtation? Will that be conceived as inappropriate? Does she really have to get going because she's got kids and she wants to get home? It's like, does she think it's weird, but it's true. Let's see. The easiest woman to talk to is an older postmenopausal woman who just wants the knowledge and there's no BS involved. You just have the conversation. But that's like rare too. Okay, let's see. Next quote here is this guy, Jay McInerney. I think writing does come out of a deep well of loneliness and a desire to fill some gap. No one in his right mind would sit down and write a book if he were well-adjusted, happy man. Yeah, that's the other thing too. We're all socially isolated. Like when I was in high school, I had lots of friends, and there was always something to do. There was always a party. There was all these, young single girls, and we're all, and them all from school, and there's some social event. There was always something going on. You didn't need to stay home reading a book. Now at my age, I'm 59. There's nothing to do. I'll just read a book and and talk. There's no events happening. So don't get me wrong. I'm very grateful that I have the time and I have the life where I can read and study, and I think that's a wonderful part of my life. But I'm just saying it's like also too, like when I was at different places, when I was at Stanford, people say, I had 4 years at Stanford, never had a girlfriend. They'll say, well, why didn't you ask a girl out? There weren't any girls to ask out. I asked out one girl, and she kind of like laughed in my face after I did her homework for her the whole semester in my economics class. And other than that, you never saw them. There were no parties. I mean, I went to like one party every 6 months, and it would always kind of stink, and I wouldn't know anybody. That's what it was like. And I was student athlete of the year and team captain. I mean, so all my friends at at state schools, they were telling me all this wild fun they had. But Stanford's in the middle of is in the middle of a field. There's nothing there. There is no town that's close, and so it just sort of happened that way. I didn't plan it. And then med school, I went to med school, and a lot of medical schools are in bad neighborhoods, so there is no social life. No one goes out, after dark. So there were no social events, none, zero, in 4 years of medical school. You maybe go to some celebration at the end of the year, graduation, whoop-de-doo. Your parents are there, Okay, more quotes. This is by Martin Amis, English writer. He said, lads don't write novels. Being a writer means that you spend at least half of your life by yourself. That's the defining thing. Yep. Because I know a lot of guys that are super social. I mean, the last thing in the world that would ever occur to them would be to sit down and read a book or to write a novel or to write anything. A writer is on the whole most alive when alone. And there's a lot of truth in that too. What I like about being a writer and a thinker is I really like, going into things in depth, because I've reached an age where I've studied stuff ever since I was about 18. I've been reading and studying kind of constantly, if not working. So I've accumulated a lot of knowledge, and it's sort of like, this is a typical thing I've read about other men kind of like me, that when they got into late middle age, that's what they wanted to do, was write, because they'd accumulated all this knowledge and they wanted to share it with other people. So, you got to go with what you have. There's a lot of things that would be nice to have or to do, but you can only do what you're able to do. So you just have to learn to like some part of it. Okay, here's a quote from Margaret Atwood, her essay on A Writer on Writing. She said, the childhood of writers often contains books and solitude. Yeah, and that was my childhood. Basically, I had a great childhood, but I did a lot of reading to be like my father. And I had weird experiences too. When I was, for example, in third grade, I got in trouble. They probably would have called me attention deficit back in the day if they had that word back then. And instead, I just was smart. I would do the homework in 5 seconds, and then I would just goof around with my friends, and the teachers felt I was disrupting class. So they put me in a pod where I was all by myself, and they had the SRA, I think Scholastic Reader Association books or something. So I would read through all those, but I wasn't even allowed in a regular classroom. I got suspended from school, and then finally what fixed that problem was my mother knew I loved being on the wrestling team, and she said, look, no more trouble in school. I don't want you ever getting suspended again from school. And it was all for stupid stuff, just making my friends laugh and goofing off, stuff like that. So she said she wouldn't give me a ride to wrestling practice. So in order to keep being allowed to wrestle, I would have to not goof off in school. But public schools, it stinks. It was just a complete waste of time. I can remember my grade school years as sitting there, looking at the clock, looking out the window, just waiting for it to end. Kind of like the Charlie Brown and the Peanuts. The teacher drones on and on. There were a few teachers I liked. There were a few teachers who were nice to me or gave me some words of encouragement or told me to read a book or something. But most of the time, man, it was just like I was just falling asleep and daydreaming, and then I would goof off and try to make my friends laugh, and then I would get in trouble. And the whole thing was like a bunch of nonsense, most of it. Okay, now here's a quote by Samuel Johnson. The greatest part of a writer's time is spent in reading. In order to write, a man will turn over half a library to make one book. Yeah, that's the case, especially when you're writing on a topic that's new to you. You have to plow through tons and tons of stuff to be able to put it all together and summarize it. Okay, this is an Orwell quote. I already went through some of this, so I'll skip the part I already did. Here's a Henry David Thoreau quote. How vain it is to sit down to write when you have not stood up to live. Yeah. you got to have some life experience if you're going to write about certain things. Because, for example, when I was a kid, I wanted to be like my dad, and we would sometimes watch that English masterpiece theater, those English novels from the 1800s and whatnot. And I enjoyed it. I liked trying to be around my dad and talk to him. But when I look back, I really didn't understand those books. How can you understand relationships and heartbreak when you've never had that experience yet? But I think it was still valuable because I spent all that time sort of diving through the words. So I was building up my vocabulary and everything, even though I didn't understand the emotional stuff yet. Like Tess of the D'Urbervilles, how are you going to understand that when you're a 12-year-old kid? But then when you go back to it, like have to read it for college, then you get the book and you have some familiarity with it. And I was lucky enough I could talk to my dad about books. Now here's a quote by Constable. He said, "There has never been a boy painter, nor can there be. The art requires a long apprenticeship, being mechanical as well as intellectual." Yeah, that's true too. In general, people just don't have the emotional depth at a young age to write a sophisticated novel type of book. The remarkable exception would be Goethe when he wrote The Sorrows of Young Werther. He was only in his early 20s at that time. But in general, young people usually can't produce that much of emotional magnitude. An exception also, if you think about sculpture, was Michelangelo when he made the Pietà statue. And that's because his own mother had died when he was about 6, 7 years of age. So in a sense, Jesus Christou was almost like himself on the lap of his mother. It was like Michelangelo. And that's the most beautiful statue ever made. And Aristotle had said something along those lines as well. He said that there are intelligent young people, but there are no wise young people, because wisdom requires experience. It requires experience with the specific, not just the general. So a young person, they can read all the books in the world. They just don't have enough life experience. So you got to have some life experience to be emotionally sophisticated, and you have to have some experience with whatever the given topic is to be wise in it. So in general, young people just aren't going to have that unless it's something unusual, like, perhaps a sport. They were good at their sport when they were young or something like that. Okay, Shenstone. Humility is to genius as an extinguisher is to a candle. Yeah, I've known a lot of people who are really great at what they do. They're usually all really, stuck up about what they do, but that's just because they're confident. And they have to be confident because you go out in the real world and it's competitive, and a lot of people try to criticize you and not criticize and mock your achievements. So if you're not confident in them, you're going to be weak and get sort of pushed down. So you have to be strong and say, look, I did this. I know I could do it, so let me do it. Leave me alone. Consciousness of our powers augments them. Yeah, that's true too. Being aware that you have the ability to do something makes you confident that it's worth it to try doing something even greater. But you got to have that confidence. And I know, like, what helped me in college is I was with these cross-country guys who had all scored higher than me on the SAT test. And I'm like, I would play games with them, Risk, Mastermind, Monopoly, and all this stuff. And I could do just as well with them at these games. And I'm like, why didn't I do better on the SAT? So I retook it a couple times, and then I did just as well or better than them. And I'm like, well, why can't I be an A student? I never even took honors classes in high school. But that's why it's good to be around people whoever is good at what you do. If you have the opportunity to meet them in person and hang around them, you should do that, because it just rubs off on you that this is what it takes to be really good in this area. So when I started hanging around the guys who were really good at school, I got better at school. Okay, here's a little bit about poetry writing. First quote's from Billy Collins, the poet. "I'm a line maker. I think that's what makes poets different than prose writers. That's the main way. We think in lines. They think in sentences." As a matter of fact, if I was going to train somebody to write, I'd recommend you spend a lot of time trying to learn how to write poetry, because then you get a sense of rhythm, you get a sense of rhyme, how words work, how sounds work. Writing songs, for example, things that are partial rhymes, complete rhymes, all the different types of rhyme. Even write a rap song or something, because once you can do that, then you'll be much better at writing good sentences in prose. And, study comedians, study good public speakers, motivational speakers. You just develop a feel for it from being around it. It was like, too, when I was a sophomore in college, I had some injuries. I was thinking about quitting the wrestling team, and Mark Schultz, the great wrestler, national champion, Olympic champion, he said to me, "Pete, your problem is you're just not hanging around with wrestlers. I hang around with all these academic guys." He goes, "You got to live in the athlete fraternity and hang around with the wrestlers." And once I did that, I got way better at wrestling and hanging around him. So be around the people who are good at what you want to do. And if you're a writer, you want to be a writer, spend a lot of time reading with the great writers. If you can meet one in person, that's great. You probably won't, but at least you could watch their videos, read their books and you'll get a lot better. Okay, Gilbert Hayek quote, poetry is halfway between prose and music. Voltaire, poetry says more in fewer words than prose. Okay, Ralph Waldo Emerson, everything in creation has its appointed painter or poet, and it remains in bondage, like the princess in the fairy tale, until its appropriate liberator comes to set it free. Yeah, and that's kind of like the idea of you'll have a book in your mind. Like I have a book in my mind. I'd like to rewrite the standard biochemistry textbooks and pathophysiology textbooks, but I just don't have the time. I have to work, like 5 days a week. And what I really want to do is write these books. But, there's no money in it, and I got to work. I still got one kid going through graduate education. So it's just how it is. But it's sitting in my brain. And I could do it, but if I did that, I'd have to give up the YouTube. I'm kind of having fun with the YouTube, and a lot more people are willing to watch a movie than read a book. But I like the idea of a book having more lasting ability. Plus, you can go into more complex depth in a book. I actually enjoy writing books. The crown of literature is poetry. It is the end and the aim. Poetry is the sublimest activity of the human mind. It is the achievement of beauty and delicacy. The writer of prose can only step aside when the poet passes. That's Somerset Maugham. Okay, here's Edgar Allan Poe. Poetry is the rhythmical creation of beauty in words. Okay, now, for example, it was many, many years ago in a kingdom by the sea that a maiden there lived whom you may know, whose name was Annabel Lee. And I was a child and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea. Okay, so anyways, it's magnificent. Edgar Allan Poe was, perhaps the greatest poet who ever lived. It is just magnificent. And in the modern rap, the really good rap, even though I know he's an idiot savant, he's a pain in the ass and a jerk, Eminem writes some great rap songs. If you study writing rap music, you'll be amazed at how good Eminem. He's like Mozart of writing rap. Okay, but anyways, Edgar Allan Poe continues. True poetry is word music. Yeah, it's just so beautiful. And look at The Raven is another great poem by Edgar Allan Poe. If you check out the Simpsons version of The Raven, it's quite extraordinary as well. You can learn a lot about writing from Edgar Allan Poe. He wrote a great essay on how to write a short story. Okay, here's Boyd Packer quote. We are able to feel and learn very quickly through music, through art, through poetry, some spiritual things which we had otherwise learn very slowly. That sounds like Ayn Rand's quote, art is the concretization of metaphysics. Okay, here's Cicero. I have never yet known a poet who did not think himself super excellent. Yeah, a lot of times somebody who's got a talent for something, they're real stuck up. And I think that's actually good. Again, if you're going to achieve, you have to believe you could do it and let other people say you're conceited, but you need that belief or you can't achieve. Okay, Goethe. There is something magical about rhythm. It makes us believe that we have taken possession of the sublime. Okay, here's some anonymous quotes on rhyme and rhythm. The rhyme at the end of the line is like the punchline of a joke. Rhyme makes a sentence sound like a proverb or folk wisdom, more impressive, more important. Rhyme is the rock on which memorable slogans are built. Yeah, a rhyme a lot of times is how you know that's the end of a line in a song. And it just fixes in our mind that was a definitive point. Okay, a rhyme at the end of the line gives a sense of completeness. Now here's some quotes by Northrop Frye. He was a great art and literature critic, and he wrote a great book on the Bible. So here's his quote. Nursery rhymes are the best possible introductions to poetry. The aim of education is to be able to distinguish illusion from reality. Nursery rhymes are the only really popular poetry that we have. Millions of people know Hey Diddle Diddle and Jack and Jill who have never read a line of Shakespeare. Yeah, because it makes it so memorable, these rhymes. Okay, Italo Calvino, the poet, and here's what he has to say. Writing prose should be like writing poetry. Looking for the concise, concentrated, and the memorable. Okay, I think this is the last page here, and then for this part 2 of How to Write Better. So a couple of opening lines that were famous. It was a dark and stormy night by Edward Bulwer Lytton. And that was used in one of the Charlie Brown and the Peanut stories. I think Snoopy was reading that story, and it was funny. I used to love the old Charlie Brown and the Peanut stories. Snoopy, all that stuff was great stuff. Okay, from Moby Dick, Herman Melville, Call Me Ishmael. And that's just sort of it seems shocking in a way, and that's why it's memorable. George Orwell from 1984. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Okay, some more writing quotes. Usually a shorter sentence is better as long as it's clear. It's usually going to be SVO, subject, verb, object. Our brain just is designed to work with subject, verb, object order. That's how English language is. Of course, it's different in other languages, but for English, that's how it is. Omit needless words is what Strunk and White would say, which also could mean omit the boring part. If something's boring, just take it out. Have the ability to not hang on to something just because you put effort in writing it down, but let it go. If it don't work in the book, let it go. Omit hyphens whenever possible. Yeah, there's something eyesore and ugly about a hyphen, so you don't want to use them if you don't have to. The best work that anybody ever writes is the work that is on the verge of embarrassing him, always, by Arthur Miller, the playwright. Yeah, there's a lot of truth in that. You're like, should I do this? Do I sound like a goof off with this, or is this out of line? But a lot of times you get this feeling, this intense emotional feeling about it, and that's probably the best part of whatever it is that you're writing. So you got to use judgment. And when you're in doubt about what to do, ask a friend. They'll be more objective. You're kind of emotionally connected to the line, so you're less certain about what's the objective truth of it. Okay, Francis Rene Chateaubriand, he says, the original writer is not one who imitates nobody, but one who nobody can imitate. Yeah, and it's a little bit like painting. To become great, a painter, first of all, tries to imitate all the masterpieces of the other great painters, and then they start to have their own style. But they have to go through that phase of learning what's been done before they can add to it. Okay, here's a quote by Alan Watts. He says, writing advice, take a deep breath and tell us your deepest, darkest secret so that we can wipe our brow and know that we are not alone. Yeah, that's good writing, is when you tell the truth about something that's maybe not that easy to talk about or is not that well known, and that's what's most likely to help people. So I think that's going to be it for this one. Yep, so that's the end of How to Write Better Part 2. Hope it was helpful.